minimalism, like every other form of photography, has an awful lot to say. It's so easy to get started and so difficult to find that last little line between the very good and the excellent.
Hello, fellow photographers. In this episode, I'm talking with W. Scott Olsen, and we are discussing minimalist photography, specifically the article I read in the digital companion of the Frames magazine. My name is Martin, and this is podcast about photography. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Make sure you're subscribed if you want to be notified when I post a new episode. If you like this content and you think other people might like it as well, feel free to take a screenshot and throw it out on your Instagram story or share it with your friends. You can find all the information in the description. Now, without any further ado, let's talk about photography. My guest today is university professor, writer, photographer, and interviewer himself, W. Scott Olsen. Thank you for joining me, Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Martin. It's a lovely day out here on the prairie. How are you doing?
Yeah, perfect. Today's topic I would like to talk about with you is minimalism in photography. And I got this idea when I was reading one of your articles for Frames magazine. For those of you who don't know, the Frames magazine publishes a digital companion every month where you can find similar articles like the one we are going to talk about today. So, with your permission, I would just read a part of the article and then we can discuss it.
Go for it.
The article we are going to talk about is called Winter Solitude by Steve Silverman. Steve Silverman is a Canadian award-winning fine art photographer, and you can find out more about him in the description. So, let's check out the article. Let's begin with and stay with the image. Here we have a tree. Nothing more, it seems. We are told it's winter, so there aren't any leaves. The image is black and white, so there is no color. There is no ground and no sky, just a bare tree, centered in the frame. Pretty simple, right? So why is this picture so alluring? Minimalism, of course, is a powerful and popular type of photography. It's also easy to do badly or not get past the cliché. Do we really need to see yet another pier extending into glassed out water? But when it's done well, it opens something both evocative and deep. My first question would probably be, how do we get past the cliché?
You know, that's a really good question because, and especially in minimalism, where everything matters, it's you have to do the cliche. I mean, you have to practice. You have to take, 100 or 100,000 images to try and figure out where those nuances are. Minimalism is, to my way of thinking, an awful lot like a Japanese form of poetry called haiku, which is just 3 lines. It's only got a certain number of syllables. And you think, how simple. And yet that simplicity becomes a tremendously challenging form. What can you get into those syllables? That's going to be more than a cliche, more than a kind of trite generality. Like so many things, minimalism requires practice. It requires either accident and you just say thank you, God, and move on, or it requires a real dedication to the form. The difference between cliche and insight in minimalism or anything else is a really, really difficult border to cross. We all know people who are very good piano players, but they're not great. Okay. We know people who are really good at cooking and would never hold a job as a chef. So where is that line? Well, it's not permanent. It fluctuates, with every image. But how do you get past the cliche? Basically by driving at it full speed over and over and over until you figure out, well, okay, here's something new.
And do you think the cliche is the biggest enemy of minimalist
I'm not so sure about that word. It's the biggest challenge because what we're going to do is we're going to come up with an image that's pretty good.
Okay.
And we're going to say, that's pretty good. The problem is it's not excellent. And so, is the pretty goodness enough for us to stop? It's kind of a motivation challenge than an image challenge. And keep in mind, I am a great fan of what we're going to call the cliché for right now as an etude, as a practice, as something to learn a technique. I make fun of an image in that introduction you read about a lake or a river or whatever, and and there's some pier, some dock that's sitting right in the middle of the frame, going out into the water, and the water's all smooth and the sky is moody. It's a great picture, and everybody's taken it. It has become sort of the standard emblem of a lot of minimalism. You need to learn how to take that one. I mean, you've got to do the rudiments, but you can't stop there.
Do you think the problem is with those types of shot is at the core of that particular photograph itself, or is it perhaps because it has been done so many times before that it becomes the cliché that everyone takes the same picture again and again? Because when I look at, let's say, famous photographers like let's say Michael Kenna, we can also see him taking pictures of pier disappearing in the glassed out water, right?
Absolutely. And the answer to your question is both. I absolutely adore, and I wrote about this in Frames in a different article, an image of a minimalist image of a pier sticking out into the lake. But the water is disturbed. The water's got some rush to it. The water's, it's sort of trying to pull this dock back, out into the water. There's a little bit of drama. There's a little bit of narrative. I absolutely adored that. And the difference between that and the cliché is so small, except the photographer said, wait a minute, there's a story here. There's a narrative. There's something going on other than technique.
How would you define the minimalist photography? Do you think it's a genre of its own, like, let's say, landscape or, I don't know, street photography? Or is it more like cross the genres thing that you can do like a minimalist photography within the genre of, let's say, landscape photography or street photography or macro photography?
Yeah, and again, the answer is both. Is it its own genre? Absolutely. I mean, there are people who leave the door and they say, I'm going out and I am looking for minimalist landscapes, minimalist cityscapes, whatever. Their whole aesthetic is that's what they're looking for before they ever bring the camera up to their face. And it's marvelous, just like the haiku in poetry. It is its own form. It has its own strength. And when it's done well, I think it's one of the premier photographic forms. Is it also possible to do that within other stuff? Oh, sure. But now we're talking about composition. How do you isolate things in a larger frame? Minimalism is an aesthetic. It's a way of looking at the world. Sometimes it's in the front, sometimes it's in the back, but it is all about evocation. It's not about journalism. It's not about documentary, although those things can certainly be minimalist. It's minimalist photography. For me, is all about evoking an idea or a mood or a feeling that really causes you to sort of stop and ponder the depth of the still image.
So basically capture the essence of the subject.
The essence, or maybe not the essence, but an essence. You've captured something, and you may not even know what that something is. Okay, but you're looking at it and you're thinking, this is good. This is something I gotta take, and you go from there.
But basically, when we talk about like the technique or the approach, you strip the subject to its essentials, right? Like you remove all the distractions and everything around the subject to make it appear, in the space, and then the negative space seems to be as important as the positive space, right?
Oh,
Because,
yeah, absolutely. It's about isolation and emphasis.
and do you think it's trend more across? I wouldn't say humanity, but you also talk in the article about Marie Kondo and this trend of minimalism, people getting rid of things in their like real life, and
Yeah.
then this also transcends into photography and other art and stuff. So do you think it was the photography was influenced from those, or was it just a result of people being, I would say, fed up with some kind of style and then try to like revolt against it?
Yeah. I think the desire for simplicity has been with us since the beginning of time. In the second century, when monasteries were being built, they didn't build them in the middle of cities. They said, we're going to go out to a mountaintop. We're going to go out into the desert, because we want to simplify. We want to minimalize the noise in our life. Henry David Thoreau, his biggest advice in the 19th century was simplify. So we are, we've identified hoarding as a disease. We want to have our lives to be more attentive, more in focus. And I don't mean that photographically only. We want clarity. So is it a revolt? Yes. But is it new? Not even close. I think we fight against, the noise all the time.
Another thing that struck me in your article was the Plato's cave you wrote about, right? I'm just gonna read the part of the article, and let's not forget Plato's cave. While the allegory is not an argument for minimalism, it is nonetheless an argument that an idea, more so than an object or its shadow, is the highest form of reality. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's a peculiar reading of Plato's cave, but I still enjoy it. If you know the allegory, there are people in a cave, they're looking at a wall, and all they see are shadows, and they don't know any better. That's all they know. And then through the allegory, they learn, well, no, there's actually people, and there's several layers of reality, of perceived reality that's in there. The crossover for photography is that the image, not the tree, not the pier, not the lake, the image is its own thing. And it is its own form of reality. Not the only one, maybe not the highest, maybe not the lowest. But we're no longer asking of what is this a representation. We're saying it is its own idea. And that reality, that idea, really, I think is one of the motivating, or not motivating, focusing elements for minimalist photographers. So many photographers that I talk to, I say, what is it you're doing with your photography? They come back with ideas. They say, I'm trying to photograph, a kind of spirituality, or I'm trying to photograph love, or I'm trying to photograph. They don't say I'm trying to photograph a building, and they don't say, well, boy, I'm going to get down, my shooting at f1.8. I'm going to make that really good. They come up with a heart truth, something from their soul that they want to find in their images. I think that's really cool. I mean, that's, can you imagine, hey, honey, I'm going to go out, take some pictures. Really? What do you take pictures of? Oh, I'm going to take pictures of love. Huh?
Okay.
But when you catch it, it's like nothing else.
Yeah, now I understand it, because you wrote also, note that Silverman calls it winter solitude, not winter tree. This is
right.
A picture of an idea.
Yes. Yeah, the tree is there, but that's not what it's a picture of. Minimalism is about a feeling. It's about an aesthetic. It's about a way of looking at the world. Like I said, it is not only documentary or anything else.
And do you think should every photographer explore or try minimalist photography? Will it improve how you see the world or how you take pictures?
There's two questions there. The answer is yes, and the answer is I don't know. I'll give you an example though. A few years ago, I don't know why, but I was looking at a picture that was levitation photography. And I thought, I wonder if I can do that. So I got a friend and I made her pose, sitting on a stool. Then I took another picture and erased the stool and stacked the pictures and stuff. And I thought, okay, that's a really sort of, for me, pointless technique. I learned how to do it, and I had absolutely nothing to say doing it.
Okay.
It was a skill, and not even a very interesting one, although, other people have done it. I think every photographer should, and, even if all they're doing is learning, they don't like it, they should go out and dedicate themselves to a minimalist project to see how it fits their way of shooting and their way of looking at the world. I know a lot of street photographers that go out and shoot landscapes. I know a lot of landscape photographers that get into photojournalism, not as career changes, but as practice, as depth, as skill-based. And you might surprise yourself. You might be, you might make your living photographing rock and roll concerts. So you go out and you do some minimalist work and you say, hey, I didn't know about this. This is pretty cool. So yes, everybody should try it. Will it make them a better photographer? Maybe not. But will it make them a wiser photographer? Yes.
I also like how you wrote that. I go back a little bit to the beginning, how it's easy to do badly, and then you expand on that there is actually quite a lot going on in the image. So is that something that is maybe something how to get past the cliché to not only capture the glassed out water and the pier, that capture is it the essence of making a good minimalist picture, to have a lot of going on at one time, and also, being a minimalist picture, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. The a lot going on is often in the viewer more so than the photographer. And just again, just like the poet, you're providing a space for that response. If you go back to that image that you began with, the sky and the ground there are really sort of muted. They're almost disappearing, and what that is, it's a space for me to sort of say, as the viewer, to say, how do I feel about this? What do I think about this? What does this isolation make me think about and feel? So if you think about it, if you think about photography as providing space for a response, that's sort of getting at how you shoot minimalism. Okay, it's not so much, let's remove all the objects. It's how much space have I given for the viewer to participate in the creation of meaning here.
Yeah, no, I finally understand it once you explain it, because I was just thinking, maybe for me, and it might be because of my ignorance, I just thought, okay, you remove all the distraction and let the viewer focus solely on the subject, and that might be minimalist photography, which, according to your explanation now, would be the general, without the idea behind this. And when I look at the tree, I see I would say almost like a fine art, or it is a fine art photograph. And what it evokes in you, it doesn't just evoke, you are standing in the middle of the field in the winter and taking picture of the tree.
Mm-hmm. If you think about it, a lot of photographers that are working for like museums and stuff, they've got a little white box or a black box, whatever, and they put the artifact in this little box and they take a picture of it for documentary purposes. Here is the 14th century belt buckle. they're not asking for emotional response. They're asking for inventory. But that's that's the kind of remove all the distractions. But that's not minimalist photography.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, minimalist is bringing in the reader,
not
the viewer.
A good one, right?
Right. Well, no, I mean, those pictures are very important. You can imagine if there was a disaster at a major museum, they need those pictures. But they're not asking for an emotional response. I think minimalism begins and ends with the desire for an emotional response on the part of the viewer.
And how you mentioned, the minimalist image is not a symbol of anything. It just exists in that level of consideration. Could you maybe expand on that? Or it's basically what we are talking about. Yeah.
That tree in that image is not a symbol of
winter tree,
life or love or happiness or whatever. There's no one-to-one correlation there. It might mean something entirely different to you than it does to me, than it does to anybody else. But that's the level it's at. It's at the level of emotion and idea. It's not at the level of look at the way the bark is split. Obviously the tree needs watering. That kind of stuff.
And now your description now fits perfectly when you also think of impressionists or abstract art, or jazz improvisation. So I can easily imagine a bad jazz improvisation and a good one. So that's basically where we're getting at with taking pictures.
I think the world's best photographers are very much like good jazz musicians. They've got the skills, they know the melody, they know the harmony, but damn it, tonight I'm going to play it in a different way, and I'm going to go off this way a little bit and see what happens, or I'm going to go off this way in a little bit. Improvisation comes after all sorts of technical expertise, but that's what we're after. Minimalism, like every other form of photography, has an awful lot to say. And it's so easy to get started and so difficult to find that last little line between the very good and the excellent. And like I said, that's not a permanent line. You don't cross it and then stay there forever. You cross it with this image, then, you might wait 6 months and do it again. But if it's in your heart, just like, being a poet might be in your heart, chase it with everything you got.
Thank you once again for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure to subscribe whenever you're listening to it. You can find this podcast live on YouTube, where you can ask questions in the real time, or find us in your favorite podcast application. Come back next week, because I will be talking with Eric Kim about his photography. I'm very happy you are tuning in for another episode of Podcast About Photography. Until next time.